They laughed at them from across the restaurant. Strangers pulled out phones. Someone whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. Because what they saw didn't make sense to them. A tired, ordinary man sitting across from one of the most powerful women in the city. And apparently that was funny. That was something worth photographing. What those people didn't know, what they couldn't have known, is that the man sitting at that table was the first person in years to look at Vivian Mercer like she was just a woman, not a headline, not a punchline, just a woman. And she was terrified of how much that mattered. If this story finds you tonight, drop a like and tell me in the comments. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. The thing about rock bottom is that it rarely announces itself. It doesn't send a warning. It doesn't give you time to brace. It just shows up one Tuesday morning disguised as a broken washing machine, a permission slip you forgot to sign, and a voicemail from your landlord that starts with, "I hate to do this, but..." Grayson Hale was 32 years old, and he had learned to recognize rock bottom on sight. He'd lived close enough to it long enough to know its particular smell. Coffee that's been sitting too long, laundry that didn't make it to the dryer, the specific silence of a small apartment where it's just you and your kid and every decision you've ever made stacked up against the walls like unpaid bills. He was standing in the kitchen of that apartment at 6:47 in the morning, packing his daughter's lunch with the methodical focus of a man who understood that if he stopped focusing even for a second, something would slip. "Dad?" "Yeah." "You put mustard on my sandwich." "You like mustard." "I liked mustard. In second grade. I'm in third grade now." He stopped, looked at the sandwich, looked at his daughter, Maisie, who was 8 years old and already regarded him with the particular patience of someone who had long since accepted that her father was doing his best, and his best was sometimes mustard on a sandwich she hadn't wanted in 2 years. "Since when?" he said. "Since forever, Dad." He scraped the mustard off. Maisie watched him do it with the expression of someone who had made peace with imperfection. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, a little too knowing, and her own particular stubbornness that was entirely her own. She'd gotten it from somewhere. Grayson suspected it wasn't from him, though people who knew him well might have disagreed. "Mrs. Patterson says we're doing a family tree project," Maisie said, swinging her legs under the kitchen chair. "Yeah?" "She said we need photos." "We have photos." "Old ones?" "What kind of photos?" "Like, of grandparents and aunts and uncles." A pause. "And moms." The kitchen went quiet in that particular way it always did when Maisie circled the subject without landing on it. She was good at that. She'd been doing it since she was 5, like she understood instinctively that some conversations needed to be approached the way you'd approach a stray animal, slowly, without sudden movements. Grayson set the sandwich in her lunchbox and zipped it shut. "We'll figure something out," he said. "I'll talk to Mrs. Patterson." Maisie looked at him for a second, then nodded, apparently satisfied with the non-answer. "Okay," she said. "Can I have the apple slices or the whole apple?" "Which do you want?" "Slices." "Then slices." He cut the apple. They didn't talk about the family tree project again. He dropped her at school by 7:30, stood on the sidewalk watching her run through the front doors without looking back. She never looked back, she'd gotten that from him. And then he drove 40 minutes across the city to his first job, which was maintenance work at a mid-size office building downtown. He worked there until 2, then crossed town to his second job at a warehouse where he loaded cargo until 7. 2 nights a week, he picked up a third shift doing deliveries. He'd been doing some version of this for 3 years, since the divorce. Since the custody arrangement that gave him full custody, full responsibility, and approximately 0 margin for anything going sideways. He didn't complain about it. Complaining seemed beside the point when the alternative, Maisie growing up without a consistent parent, wasn't something he was willing to consider. But there were nights, driving home at 8 or 9 o'clock, when he'd catch himself sitting in the parking lot of their building for an extra 5 minutes just to exist somewhere that wasn't moving, just to breathe without being on the way to something. His friend Marcus had noticed this, the way good friends notice things without necessarily knowing what to do about them. Marcus worked with him at the office building, did maintenance on the upper floors while Grayson handled the lobby and the mechanical room. They'd been friends for 6 years, which meant Marcus had known him before Maisie, before the marriage, before all of it, which also meant Marcus had opinions. "You need to get out," Marcus told him one afternoon in early October, the two of them eating lunch on the loading dock because the break room smelled like someone had microwaved fish again. "I'm out right now," Grayson said. "You know what I mean." "I know what you mean, and I don't have time." "One dinner." Marcus. "My girlfriend knows someone." Marcus held up a hand before Grayson could speak. "I know. I know how that sounds. But she says this woman is, I'm not doing a setup." "Why not?" "Because the last time someone said they knew someone, I ended up at a restaurant listening to a woman explain her crystal collection for 2.5 hours. This isn't like that." "They never say it's like that." Marcus was quiet for a moment, peeling the wrapper off his sandwich with the focus of a man choosing his next words carefully. "She's different," he said finally. "Smart, real, doesn't have anything to prove." A pause. "She's been through some things." Grayson looked at him. "Everybody's been through some things." "Yeah, but—" Marcus seemed to be searching for the right framing. "She's been through the kind of things that would have broken most people. And they didn't break her, but they changed her. You know how some people get hard from that? She got softer, more careful. She pays attention." Grayson ate his sandwich. He thought about the parking lot. He thought about 5 minutes of just breathing. "One dinner?" he said. Marcus nodded once, like a man who understood when not to push. Vivian Mercer had not wanted to agree to this. She'd said no 3 times, in 3 different ways, across the span of 2 weeks. She'd said she was busy, which was true. She'd said she wasn't ready, which was more complicated. She'd said she didn't really do setups, which was mostly true, except for the 2 previous occasions where she'd agreed to setups and regretted both of them for reasons that were still too recent to be funny. But her friend Claudia had a particular talent for persistence that Vivian had never found a way to get around. Claudia had been her friend since college, since the years before the company, before the board, before every magazine profile that somehow always managed to include a paragraph about her weight that had nothing to do with anything she'd actually said in the interview. Claudia also had the specific unfair advantage of knowing exactly what to say. "He's not looking for anything," Claudia told her over the phone. 3 days before the dinner Vivian hadn't technically agreed to yet. "He's not trying to impress you. He doesn't know who you are, and honestly, Viv, I don't think he'd care even if he did." Vivian was in her office, 26th floor, looking out at the city in the way she looked at it when she wasn't really looking at it. "Everyone cares," she said. "He's raising a kid alone and working 60-hour weeks. He doesn't have time to care about your net worth." "That's not what I meant." Claudia was quiet for a moment. Then, more gently, "I know what you meant." The thing was, Vivian had learned to expect a particular kind of attention. The kind that assessed her before she spoke. The kind that made certain calculations based on what it saw before deciding whether what she said afterward was worth listening to. She'd learned this early, had spent the better part of her 20s trying to outrun it, and had eventually arrived at 30 feeling something complicated about the fact that she ran a billion-dollar company and still walked into certain rooms bracing herself. She was 30 years old. She had 340 employees. She had a board that respected her results, if not always her methods. A reputation for making decisions that looked reckless until they didn't, and a corner office with a view that still occasionally surprised her when she forgot to take it for granted. She also ate dinner alone most nights, not because she had to, but because the alternative, small talk, the performance of it, smiling through the assessment, had stopped feeling worth the energy somewhere around her last relationship, which had ended 14 months ago in a way that was still not something she could talk about without her jaw tightening. "One dinner," Claudia had said. "Just meet him. You don't have to do anything else." So she'd agreed, mostly to stop having the conversation, partly because Claudia knew her well enough that when she said a person was different, there was a reasonable chance she was right. She wore a dark green dress that she liked and heels that were comfortable in her hair the way she actually wore it, not the way she sometimes styled it for events when she was aware of being watched. She was always aware of being watched. But there was a version of aware that was armor, and a version that was just attention. She was trying for the second one. She arrived at the restaurant at 7:15, which was 5 minutes after the reservation. She was never late. She'd been sitting in her car for 8 minutes in the parking garage trying to decide if she actually wanted to do this, and the math had shaken out to a mild loss. The restaurant was upscale. Claudia's doing, Vivian suspected, some idea about first impressions, with low lighting and the kind of acoustics that made every conversation sound like a secret. The host led her to a table near the center of the room, which was not where she would have chosen, and she was aware of the eyes that tracked her as she moved through the space. She was always aware of that. The man at the table stood when he saw her coming. That surprised her, not because it was unusual, but because he did it without any performance. No studied casualness. No quick evaluation masked as a smile. He just stood up, the way someone does when they've been waiting and the person they're waiting for has arrived. He was tall, lean, in a way that came from working rather than gyms, with the kind of tired around his eyes that had nothing to do with not sleeping enough. It was the specific tiredness of someone who'd been paying attention to a lot of things for a long time without a break. He had dark hair that needed a cut. He was wearing a button-down shirt that he'd clearly ironed, which for reasons she couldn't immediately explain, made her chest do something she didn't expect. "Vivian?" he said. "Grayson?" They shook hands like two people who had both decided to treat this as something simple. His handshake was firm without trying to be. "I ordered water," he said, "but I can get someone if you want something else." "Water's fine," she said, and sat down. For the first 10 minutes, it was exactly what she'd expected. The careful navigation of two strangers trying to figure out what kind of conversation they were about to have. He asked how she knew Claudia. She asked how he knew Marcus. They talked about the neighborhood, about the restaurant, about the fact that neither of them had been here before. He was straightforward about it. "This isn't really my kind of place," he said, looking around at the tablecloths and the candles and the menu that didn't have prices on her copy, which she suspected meant the prices were significant. "Marcus picked it," she said. "Of course he did." There was something in the way he said it, fond but not surprised, that told her these two men had been friends long enough to know each other's particular flavors of ridiculous. "Claudia?" "Yes." "They probably thought they were doing us a favor." "They probably were," she said, more honestly than she'd intended. He looked at her then, not the way she was used to being looked at, which was either assessment or performance, but something more direct, more present. "You didn't want to come," he said. She almost denied it. "Did you?" "Not really," he said. "No offense." "None taken. Setups are a lot of pressure." "Yes. Because you're supposed to be charming, and you're supposed to be interested, and you're supposed to figure out within 2 hours whether this person is someone you could actually—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Anyway, I told Marcus I'd come, so here I am." She laughed. It came out before she could manage it, which was unusual. She generally managed her expressions in public without thinking about it, the way you learn to manage anything you've done for long enough. But something about the bluntness of it, the complete absence of any attempt to be impressive, had bypassed her reflexes. "Here we both are," she said. The waiter came. They ordered. While they were looking at the menus, she became aware, as she always eventually became aware, of the table to their left. A couple in their 50s, expensive clothes, the particular ease of people who moved through the world without friction. The woman had looked at Vivian when she sat down. She'd looked the way people sometimes looked, the way that took inventory without appearing to. Vivian was practiced at absorbing this. She'd had years of practice. You get a degree in economics and someone comments on how you carry yourself through campus. You build a startup at 24 and the profile they write about you spends 3 paragraphs on what you wore to the interview. You learn to receive this and keep going because stopping is not an option you can afford. But she felt it. She always felt it. What she didn't expect was for Grayson to notice. He wasn't looking at the table to their left. He was looking at the menu. But something shifted slightly in his posture. A small, almost imperceptible attention, the kind that comes from being the kind of person who watches. He set down his menu. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. The automatic answer. He nodded, accepting it without pressing, which was also unexpected. The dinner found its rhythm around the halfway point, somewhere between the salads and the entrees, when they stopped trying to have the kind of conversation two people on a first date are supposed to have and started having a different one. It started when she asked about the 3 jobs. She'd gathered this from something Marcus had apparently mentioned to Claudia, who had mentioned it to her, and he answered without embarrassment, direct, matter of fact. Maisie's got school fees, he said, and the apartment isn't cheap, but it's in a good district, and I'm trying to put some aside for when things come up. When, not if, she said. Yeah, it's always when. A slight pause. My transmission went in July. August, my water heater. September, the school needed. There's always something. How do you plan for that? You don't, really. You just try to have enough buffer that when it happens, you can absorb it without everything collapsing. She understood this in a different way than he might have expected. I think about that with the company, she said. Not the same scale, obviously, but the same. There's always something. You can see some things coming and some things you can't, and the difference between surviving and not surviving is whether you built enough runway. He looked at her. That's exactly it. You just build runway. For 8 years, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, not self-pity, just honest accounting, that settled something in her chest. Tell me about her, she said. Maisie. His face changed. Not dramatically, but there was a loosening, some quality in him that had been careful and became less careful. The way you look when you're talking about the one thing in your life you don't have any ambivalence about. She's stubborn, he said. Gets it from somewhere, I don't know where. The corner of his mouth went up. Smart. Like catches you in a lie, smart. I can't get away with anything. What kind of lies do you tell? The dad kind. Everything's fine, that's not expensive. Of course, Santa eats the cookies himself and doesn't leave some of them in the kitchen for later. He paused. She asked me last Christmas why Santa's handwriting looked like mine. Vivian laughed again. What did you say? I said Santa hired helpers to write the tags because his handwriting was getting hard to read in his old age. He shook his head. She looked at me for about 5 seconds, then said, okay. I don't know if she believed me or if she was just letting me have it. I think she was letting you have it. Yeah, he said. I think so too. The conversation moved. It moved the way good conversations do when neither person is performing. Not linearly, not toward any particular destination, but following the natural gravity of two people who find, somewhat to their surprise, that the other person is interesting. She told him about starting the company at 24, about the first investor meeting where she'd presented for 45 minutes, and then been asked, as the first question, whether she had a business partner. She'd said yes, her team of 12. The follow-up question had been whether there was a male co-founder. She'd said no, there was not. What did you do? Grayson asked. I got the investment anyway, she said. That particular firm I didn't, but the next one I went to I led with the numbers first, before anything else. Numbers first, because numbers are harder to argue with than impressions. He was quiet for a moment. That's a strategy, he said. It's armor, she said, before she'd decided to say it. He didn't offer an opinion on that. He just looked at her with that particular attention again, the one that was present without being invasive, and let it sit. It was during dessert. Neither of them had been going to order it, and then both of them did, because the waiter mentioned the chocolate torte in a way that made denial feel like a failure of imagination. That the table 2 down from theirs became loud enough to intrude. Not loud in volume, loud in the particular frequency of people who want to be heard by others but are pretending they don't. A group of 4, 2 couples. They'd been drinking since before Grayson and Vivian had arrived, which loosened things. One of the women, red dress, the kind of laugh that's engineered to be noticed, said something, and one of the men at her table looked toward Grayson and Vivian and smirked. Then someone at that table picked up a phone. Vivian saw it. She was always watching for it, the unconscious vigilance of someone who'd spent years learning what that particular gesture meant. The held-up phone, the angled shot, the barely suppressed smile. She kept her face level, kept her posture the same. She'd gotten very good at receiving this without flinching, But across the table, Grayson's jaw tightened. He'd seen it too. Don't, she said quietly. He looked at her. It's not worth it, she said. Let them. That's... He stopped, seemed to be deciding something. They're photographing you without asking. I know. That's not okay. I know that too. She held his gaze. But if you react, that becomes the story. I have enough stories. He sat with that for a moment. She watched him absorb it, not entirely satisfied, the way someone who has a strong natural instinct toward fairness is never quite satisfied by pragmatic solutions, but accepting it, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. This happen a lot? He asked. More than it should. Because of... He stopped, seemed to be weighing how to ask. She answered the question he hadn't finished. Because of how I look, yes, mostly. She said it plainly because there was no version of dancing around it that made it better. I run a successful company. I've been profiled in major publications, and 9 times out of 10 the subtext of the conversation is what it always is. She picked up her fork. I've learned to just keep moving. Grayson was quiet. He looked at his dessert, then at her, with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not pity, not discomfort, something closer to a particular quiet anger on her behalf, held carefully. That's a lot of moving, he said. It is, she agreed. They ate their dessert. The table 2 down continued its performance. Someone, she thought it was the woman in the red dress, laughed in a way that was aimed outward. And Vivienne looked across the table at this man she hadn't wanted to meet, who was eating chocolate torte with the focused appreciation of someone who didn't get it often, who had ironed his shirt and didn't know her net worth, and had instinctively started to stand up for her before she stopped him, and felt something shift quietly in the architecture of the evening. Outside the restaurant, on the sidewalk, the night had gone cool and city bright. They stood near the entrance in the particular awkwardness of an ending that hadn't decided what it was yet. I didn't expect that, he said. The restaurant. A small gesture between them. The conversation. I didn't either, she admitted. He had his hands in his pockets. He was looking at the ground, then at her, with the expression of a man who was working something out internally. I should probably say something like, we should do this again, but I know I'm going to sound like I'm reading from a script, so... She waited. I actually want to, he said. Do this again, if that makes sense. It makes sense, she said. Okay. A pause. Okay, good. He seemed faintly relieved, the way someone is when they've said an honest thing and it hasn't blown up. I have Maisie this weekend. She's with her aunt on Saturday. I don't know what your schedule... I can do Saturday, she said. He nodded. Okay. Nothing like this, she said, gesturing back at the restaurant. Somewhere normal. The corner of his mouth went up, that particular almost smile she'd already started to catalog, without exactly meaning to. I know a diner, he said. Best coffee in the city. Also the worst ambient lighting. That sounds perfect, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. They said goodnight. She walked to her car, he walked to his, which was parked 3 blocks over because the parking structure was expensive, and he'd done the math. She didn't know that yet. She'd find it out later, and it would be one of those small, specific things she'd keep. She sat in her car for a minute before starting it. Outside, somewhere in that restaurant, someone was probably uploading a photo with a caption she'd rather not see. Tomorrow morning there would be something somewhere, a comment thread, a gossip column sidebar. The particular cruelty of anonymous observation. But right now she was sitting in a parking garage thinking about a man who had ironed his shirt and almost defended her honor and told her the honest truth about not wanting to be there. And she was aware of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safety. Not yet. But the faint, careful, dangerous possibility of it. She started the car and drove home through the city that had always watched her, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone inside the watching. Grayson got home at 9:45. His neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, had been with Maisie. She did this sometimes, quietly, in the way that good neighbors sometimes do without making it into anything. And Maisie was asleep in her bed with one arm hanging off the side and her mouth open in the specific graceless abandon of a child who hasn't yet learned to perform even in sleep. He stood in the doorway for a minute. He thought about the restaurant, about the people who'd been taking photos, about the particular quality of Vivian's voice when she'd said, "Let them," the way she'd said it, like someone reading from a very long and familiar script. He thought about the tort and the parking and the way she'd laughed, genuinely, without managing it, when he'd told her about the Santa situation. He crossed to Maisie's room and pulled her arm back onto the bed. She stirred but didn't wake. He stood there in the dark for a moment, in the apartment that was small and had bad water pressure and needed new windows, in the life he'd built out of what was available, with the runway he'd been constructing for 8 years. "She pays attention," Marcus had said. Yeah, Grayson thought. He went to the kitchen and made coffee for the morning, because if he forgot he'd be useless before 7, and stood at the counter thinking about Saturday. About a diner with bad lighting, about a woman who ran a company and ate dessert and was trying to build something too, out of different materials, in a different direction, but with a recognizable kind of discipline. The city was quiet outside. He drank a glass of water and thought, for the first time in longer than he could exactly remember, that something might be happening. Not that it would be easy. He knew, on some practical level, that whatever this was or wasn't going to be would have complications he couldn't fully see yet. He was someone who loaded cargo. She ran a billion-dollar company. The world had opinions about everything, and this would not be an exception. But she'd said Saturday like she meant it. And he was going to take that at face value and see what Saturday looked like, and figure out the rest as it came. It was the only way he knew how to do anything. You built the runway. You dealt with what came up. You kept going. He rinsed the glass, turned off the kitchen light, went to check on Maisie one more time. She'd moved entirely sideways, was now diagonal across the bed, with the structural logic of someone who'd inherited her father's tendency to occupy whatever space was available, and smiled at her in the dark. "Okay," he said, to no one in particular, to the apartment, to himself, to the day that was ending. He went to bed. The city kept moving outside the window, indifferent and bright. The diner was called Rudy's, and it had been on the corner of Clement and 19th for longer than either of them had been alive. The lighting was, as advertised, genuinely terrible. Fluorescent tubes that buzzed faintly and gave everything a yellow tint that made the laminated menus look like artifacts from a previous decade. The coffee came in mugs with mismatched handles. The booths had duct tape over a crack in the vinyl that someone had clearly been meaning to fix since approximately 2011. Vivian arrived first. She slid into a booth near the window, ordered coffee without looking at the menu because she'd decided on the drive over that she was going to stop performing and just be wherever she was. And then she sat with both hands around the mug and looked out at the Saturday morning street and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time inside a public space. Unremarkable. In the best possible way. Nobody at Rudy's cared who she was. The man at the counter was reading a newspaper, physical paper, folded in quarters. 2 women in the booth behind her were talking about a plumber who'd never shown up. The cook was running his spatula along the griddle in a long, even stroke that had the rhythm of long habit. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody was calculating anything. When Grayson came through the door at 9:10, he texted at 9:07, running a few minutes late, sorry. He was wearing a gray Henley and looked like someone who'd been awake since 6 doing things that needed doing. He had a small red mark on his chin where he'd apparently cut himself shaving, which he probably hadn't noticed. He slid into the seat across from her and picked up the menu and then put it back down. "You order?" "Just coffee." "The eggs here are good," he said. "If you want eggs." "I want eggs." He flagged the waiter with a raised hand, the unself-conscious ease of a man who'd been coming to this diner long enough that flagging the waiter felt like something between them. He ordered for both of them, eggs and toast for her, same for him, more coffee. And the waiter wrote it down without any particular ceremony and went away. "You come here a lot," she said. "Maisie and I come on Sunday mornings when I don't have an early shift. It's become a thing." He looked around the diner with a small, domestic kind of affection. "She always gets the pancakes and leaves half of them, every time. And every time I say, 'Maisie, you never finish the pancakes,' and she says, 'I'll finish them this time.'" "Does she ever finish them?" Not once. Vivian smiled. You keep ordering them for her. Yeah, well, he shrugged. She asks for them, so. They had breakfast. The eggs were good, genuinely, not in the way of trying to be good, but in the way of a kitchen that had been making eggs the same correct way for decades and saw no reason to change. The coffee was strong. Outside, the Saturday street did its Saturday things. The conversation was easier this time, like a door that had already been opened and only needed pushing rather than forcing. They talked about their weeks. She described a board meeting that had gone sideways when two members, she called them Rothwell and Pace, with the specific measured tone of someone being careful not to say what they actually thought, had attempted to relitigate a decision she'd made in August. He told her about a delivery Thursday night where the GPS had sent him to a loading dock that was inexplicably locked at 11 p.m., and he'd stood there in the cold for 40 minutes trying to reach someone, anyone, from dispatch. What did you do? She asked. Waited. Then the security guard came out for a smoke break and let me in. Turns out the system just had the wrong entrance. He drank his coffee. That was my whole Thursday. That sounds exhausting. It was fine, he said, the way he said most things about the practical difficulty of his life, not dismissively, but with the specific acceptance of someone who'd made peace with difficulty as a baseline condition. She was learning the texture of how he talked. She was learning it the way you learn someone's handwriting, through repetition, through the specific patterns that emerged. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. The jobs. 3 of them. She chose her words carefully, not because she was afraid to ask, but because she wanted to ask the right thing. Is that sustainable? Long-term? He was quiet for a moment, not offended, thinking. For now, he said. My plan was always to get to a point where I could do one thing that paid enough. I've been working toward a foreman's license. It takes time, but it's a path. How long? 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, depending on the testing schedule and a lot of things. And in the meantime, I make it work. He looked at her. I want to be clear about something because I think it's probably relevant. He seemed to be organizing something. I'm not embarrassed by what I do. I'm not looking for... He stopped, started again. Marcus mentioned a little what you do, and I just want to say I'm not here because of that. I don't need anything from you. The only reason I'm here is because Saturday morning at a diner sounded good, and you seemed like someone worth talking to. She held his gaze. I know, she said. Okay. I knew that from the restaurant. She picked up her mug. You're not that hard to read. Something in his expression loosened. People say that like it's not a compliment. It is, she said. Absolutely a compliment. The waiter came back with more coffee, and they let him refill both cups, and the morning stretched out easy and unhurried around them. They saw each other twice the following week. Once for lunch, 45 minutes, all she could manage on a Tuesday, at a Vietnamese place near her office that was loud and crowded and required almost no performance because there was no room for performance, just food and conversation crammed into a small table. Once for a walk on Thursday evening, which hadn't exactly been planned, but he'd texted at 6:30 to say he had a free hour if she wanted to, and she'd looked at the contract she'd been reading for the 3rd time without absorbing it and said yes. They walked along the riverfront for an hour. It was the kind of October evening that couldn't decide between fall and something colder, and she hadn't brought a proper jacket, and he'd noticed and offered his, which she'd declined the first time, and accepted the second time he offered, because she was cold and there was no version of being noble about being cold that made sense. She wore his jacket, and they walked and talked about nothing particularly important. She told him about a nightmare client call she'd had that morning. He told her about something Maisie had said about a boy at school with the weary resignation of a parent who was not ready for any storyline involving boys at school. And it was the most normal she'd felt inside any interaction in years, which terrified her, a little. The normalcy of it. The thing she'd learned about her particular life was that normal was the thing that could hurt you, because normal implied expecting something, and she'd spent a long time learning not to expect. She gave him back the jacket outside her building. He folded it over his arm and looked at her with that particular steady attention. You get quiet sometimes, he said. I'm always thinking. I know, but sometimes it's a different kind of quiet. He wasn't pressing, just Noting. You don't have to tell me. I'm just saying I notice. She looked at him for a moment. The street was busy around them, cabs and pedestrians, the ordinary loud machinery of an evening city. I'm not good at this, she said. At what? At... She made a small gesture that meant something like all of it, or whatever this is, or not knowing the rules. I run a company. I'm very good at running a company. I know what I'm doing there. This is... Yeah, he said. Me too. You seem very calm about it. I'm not particularly. He smiled a little. I'm just bad at showing when I'm not calm. Different thing. She laughed, the unmanaged kind, and felt the city move around her and the October cold and the general precarious feeling of something that might be beginning, and decided that for tonight she was going to leave the expecting alone and just stand on the sidewalk in this moment. Good night, Grayson, she said. Night, he said. He turned and walked toward the parking structure 3 blocks over, his jacket folded over his arm in the cold. She watched him go for a moment, then went inside. She should have known the quiet couldn't hold. The photo from the restaurant had made its way to a gossip blog. Not a major one, but the kind with enough reach to generate traction, sometime in the second week. The caption wasn't clever. It didn't need to be. A photo of the two of them at the table, taken from an angle that framed the gap between them in whatever way the photographer thought was funny, with a caption that essentially asked what that pairing was about. The comments were what comments always were. She'd stopped reading them sometime around year 2 of the company, because reading them was the equivalent of drinking something you knew was poison just to confirm it was still poison. But her assistant forwarded her a screenshot because her assistant believed Vivian had a right to know what was circulating, which was true even when Vivian wished it wasn't. She looked at it for about 30 seconds, then put her phone face down on her desk and went back to the quarterly projections. But the thing about these things, about the particular mechanism of this kind of public attention, was that it didn't stop at the source. It rippled. And the ripples found their way into places you weren't expecting. Her head of communications, a woman named Dana, with the permanently slightly alarmed expression of someone doing crisis management as a full-time lifestyle, knocked on her office door at 11 on a Wednesday morning. I wanted to give you a heads up, Dana said, in the tone she used for things she knew Vivian wasn't going to like. There's some pickup happening on the business blogs, some of the trade sites. About the photo. About the... Dana seemed to choose her words. About your personal life, generally. They're not calling it my personal life, Vivian said. No, Dana admitted. Some of them are using it to ask questions about leadership, about judgment. She shifted her weight. I don't agree with the framing. For the record, I know you don't. Vivian looked out the window. The city was gray today, overcast, the kind of flat light that made everything look slightly less resolved than usual. What do you recommend? Nothing yet. Don't react. Let it be small. A pause. If it grows, we'll deal with it. Right. Dana paused at the door. I'm sorry, Vivian. It's genuinely none of their business. Thank you, Dana. After Dana left, Vivian sat in the quiet of her office for a moment. She'd built this company from nothing. She'd built it with bad investment odds and a board that had voted against her on 3 major initiatives before being proven wrong on all 3. She'd survived a hostile acquisition attempt at 27, a brutal press cycle at 28, and a very public contract dispute at 29 that she'd won. She'd done all of it while absorbing the particular tax that comes with being who she was, looking how she looked, in a space that was not built with her in mind. She wasn't going to lose this over a photo in a diner someone had taken at a restaurant she hadn't wanted to go to. She went back to work. She told Grayson about it on Friday. They were at his apartment, the first time she'd been there, which she'd expected to be awkward and was instead just small and lived in and full of the particular evidence of a life organized around a child. Maisie was at her aunt's for the evening. Grayson had made pasta because he said it was the one thing he could make reliably well, which turned out to be accurate. They were sitting on his couch, a slightly sagging sectional that had clearly been purchased for comfort rather than aesthetics. With bowls and the television on low volume to some documentary neither of them was watching, and she told him about the photo and the blog post and Dana's visit. He listened without interrupting, the way she'd noticed he always listened, fully, without planning his response while she was still talking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you?" he said finally. "Or does it bother you because of what it might do to the company?" She thought about it. "Both," she said, "in different proportions on different days." "What's the proportion today?" "Today," she considered. "Today it bothers me because I knew it was going to happen, and I couldn't stop it, and I still can't stop it. And that feeling—" She stopped, looked at the pasta. "I spent a long time learning that some things you just can't stop, but it doesn't stop being frustrating." He nodded. "At the restaurant," he said. "When I wanted to say something to that table and you stopped me." "Yes. I've been thinking about that." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I understand why you did it. I do. But I want you to know—" He seemed to be finding the right words carefully, which she'd come to recognize as a signal that what followed mattered to him. "I'm not going to pretend this is fine, what people are doing. I'm not going to act like it's just the cost of doing business." She looked at him. "I know. Because I think you've been told that long enough. That it's just how it is. And maybe some of it is. But that doesn't mean the people doing it aren't wrong." The television played something quiet and distant. Outside the apartment, the city moved. "My ex-husband," she said, and then stopped, because she hadn't planned to start that sentence. She almost didn't finish it. Then she did. "He used to say I was too sensitive about it, that I made it bigger than it was." She kept her voice level. "He was very kind about it, actually. He genuinely believed it. He just didn't see what I saw, couldn't quite make himself see it." Grayson didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." A pause. "It wasn't all his fault." "I don't think I said it was." She looked at him. There was something in his face, not pity, not the particular discomfort of someone who doesn't know how to receive this kind of information, just a steady, quiet presence, the kind that didn't require her to soften the things she'd said or backtrack or make it easier. She'd forgotten what that felt like. She'd been forgetting things like that for years, the way you forget the specific weight of an object you used to carry all the time, until you pick it up again and realize how much you'd missed it. "The people at work," he said. "The business blogs? Is it going to be a real problem?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "What do you need from me?" The question landed in a way she hadn't expected. Not, "What do you want me to do or how can I fix it?" but what she needed. Like the answer was hers, and he was just asking to know what shape to take. "Nothing right now," she said. "I just needed to tell someone who wasn't paid to know." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. "Then I know." They finished the pasta. They watched the documentary neither of them was watching. She fell asleep somewhere around midnight on the slightly sagging sectional and woke up at 2 a.m. to find he'd put a blanket over her and was asleep in the armchair across the room, his head tipped sideways, his chest rising and falling in the specific graceless rhythm of someone who'd sat down meaning to stay awake and then hadn't. She lay there in the dark of his apartment for a moment, in the quiet of a place that felt like someone actually lived in it, and listened to the city outside. Then she closed her eyes and went back to sleep. 3 weeks in, Maisie found out. Not about the photos or the blogs. About Vivian. About the fact that her father had been going somewhere on Saturday mornings that wasn't Rudy's and had taken 2 phone calls that he'd gone into the kitchen for and had ironed a shirt on a Tuesday which wasn't something he did on Tuesdays. She found out because she was 8 and paying attention, and her father was, as she had long since established, not able to get away with anything. "Are you dating someone?" she asked him on a Sunday morning, over the pancakes she wasn't going to finish. Grayson had been reaching for the syrup. He stopped. He set the syrup down. He looked at his daughter with the particular expression of a man whose primary tactical adversary was a child who weighed 58 pounds. "What makes you ask that?" he said, which was not an answer, and both of them knew it. Maisie shrugged. "You were on the phone Thursday for a long time." "I'm on the phone a lot." "In the kitchen." He looked at her. She looked at him. The Sunday morning diner moved around them, coffee cups and newspapers and the cook's spatula in its long, even rhythm. "Her name is Vivienne," he said. Maisie ate a piece of pancake. Is she nice? I think so, yeah. Does she have kids? No. Does she like kids? He thought about it. She doesn't know Maisie yet, he said, but I think she'd like her. Maisie considered this with the seriousness of someone conducting an official review. Then she picked up her fork and said, "Okay," and moved on to the topic of a craft project that needed specific materials from the art supply store that was 17 blocks away and only open until 4 on Sundays. He made a note of the materials while he finished his eggs. He paid the check. He left a tip that was larger than it needed to be because the Sunday waitress had a specific kind of tired that he recognized. Outside on the sidewalk, Maisie put her hand in his because she still did that sometimes, in public, when she hadn't quite decided to stop yet. He held it, and they walked toward the art supply store in the Sunday morning light, and he thought about a woman asleep on a slightly sagging sectional with a blanket over her, and the particular weight of telling someone something true and having them receive it. He thought about the blogs he'd seen. Marcus had forwarded him one, with a message that said, "Just so you know," and an emoji that somehow conveyed both solidarity and caution, and about the specific quiet anger that had come over him reading the comment sections before he'd had the sense to stop reading them. He thought, this is going to get harder before it gets easier. He thought, I knew that. I think I knew that the night outside the restaurant when she said, "Let them," like someone who'd been letting people for a very long time. He thought, I'm not going to let them. Not in the loud way, not the way he'd wanted to in the restaurant, which would have made things worse, but in the way that was available to him, which was just staying, showing up, not letting the noise make the decision. Maisie squeezed his hand at the crosswalk, absently, her attention already somewhere else entirely. He squeezed back. The first time the criticism arrived at work, it came sideways. One of the guys at the warehouse, a man named Terrence, who Grayson had generally considered neutral, the kind of coworker who occupied the background without being either trouble or particular use, came over to where Grayson was working one afternoon and leaned against the shelving with the studied casualness of someone who'd been rehearsing this. "Saw something online," Terrence said. Grayson kept moving the cargo. "Yeah. About you and some lady." Is that right? You're seeing some billionaire CEO?" There was something in the way he said it, not openly hostile, but with a particular edge, the specific tone of someone who has already decided what they think and wants to see if you'll confirm it. Grayson set down the box he was holding. He looked at Terrence. "I'm seeing someone, yeah." "She's really..." Terrence gestured vaguely. "Rich, like really rich." "I'm aware. And you're..." Another gesture that meant something like you and what army, or you specifically, or this doesn't compute. Just seems like what? Grayson said. The question sat in the air without heat, but without room to maneuver either. Terrence seemed to recalibrate. "Nothing," he said. "Just different worlds, you know." "Different worlds," Grayson said, and went back to work. Terrence wandered away. The warehouse went back to its regular sounds, forklifts and conveyor belts, and the background radio someone always had running from somewhere that nobody could locate. Grayson worked until his shift ended and drove home and picked up Maisie from Mrs. Okafor's and made her do her reading before she watched anything on the tablet and stood in the kitchen making sandwiches for tomorrow while she read aloud from her book in the other room, stopping every few sentences to tell him something that had happened at school. He listened. He made the sandwiches. He did not think about Terrence. He did think about Vivian later, after Maisie was asleep, sitting on the sagging sectional in the quiet apartment. He thought about the speech she'd given him. Not a speech. She hadn't been giving a speech, but the accumulated weight of things she'd said across 4 weeks about what it meant to be watched and assessed and reduced, about what it cost to keep moving anyway. He was getting a very small window into what that cost, a very small window, from a very different angle. But it was enough to understand, on some level he hadn't before, what she'd been carrying. He texted her. "How was your Friday?" Her response came back 3 minutes later. "Long." "Yours?" "Fine. Terrence at the warehouse thinks we're from different worlds." "We are. A little." "Yeah," he typed back. "Doesn't feel like it, though." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then, "No, it doesn't." He put the phone down and looked at the quiet apartment and thought, This is the part where it would be reasonable to decide it's too complicated. This is the part where a reasonable person might step back. He thought, I've never been particularly reasonable. He went to bed. His alarm was set for 5:45 because the early shift started at 7, and the transmission had been making a sound since Tuesday that he needed to get looked at before it became the kind of problem that didn't have a small solution. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow there was the transmission and the early shift and Maisie's art project materials and the foreman's licensing study materials he kept meaning to get to at night and never quite making it. And somewhere in the city, in a 26th floor office or a too-quiet apartment, Vivian Mercer was probably still working. He set his phone on the nightstand and closed his eyes and didn't let himself think too far ahead. Just this, just what was in front of him. That had always been enough before. He was trusting it to be enough now. The gala had been on the calendar since August. Vivian had known about it for 3 months. The Mercer Group's annual charitable event, the one her PR team spent 2 quarters planning, the one that filled a ballroom with investors, board members, journalists, and the specific category of person who attended charity events, primarily to be seen attending charity events. She'd chaired it for 4 years running. She was good at it. She knew how to work a room like that, how to move from table to table and say the right thing to the right person without losing herself entirely in the performance. She hadn't planned on bringing anyone. Grayson had been the one to raise it, actually, 6 weeks before, in the specific offhand way he raised things he'd been thinking about longer than the offhandedness suggested. This gala thing, he said. They were at her apartment this time, a Thursday evening, Maisie covered for the night. He was on the couch with his shoes off, which she'd noticed he never did until she told him he could, and now he always did, which she found she liked more than made sense. Is that a solo thing for you, or? I usually go alone, she said, or with Dana. Okay. She looked at him. Do you want to come? He seemed to consider whether he was being asked what he wanted or what was advisable. Do you want me to come? Yes, she said before she'd measured it, but I want to be honest with you about what that means. It's a public event. There'll be press, board members, people who've already... She stopped. Formed opinions, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the city did its nighttime things, the low hum of it, the lights. Is it going to cause problems for you? He asked. Probably some. But you want me there. I want you there, she said. If you can manage a rented tuxedo and 4 hours of charity auction small talk. He looked at her with that expression she'd come to know. The corner of the mouth thing. The one that said he found her both somewhat exhausting and entirely worth it. I can manage 4 hours of anything, he said. Good, she said. She almost said something else then, something that had been accumulating at the edges of their conversations for weeks, something about what this was and where it was going, and whether she was the kind of person who could trust the way she felt about any of this. But the moment moved on, the way moments did, and she let it. She was still practicing, not expecting, just being in it. Oh, the problem started before the gala did. The first indication was a meeting request from Rothwell, the board member she'd been butting against since her 3rd year running the company. He was 71, had been on the board before she founded the company through a series of structural arrangements she'd inherited from the seed investors, and possessed the specific type of confidence that comes from never having been substantially wrong in any way that had cost him personally. His assistant sent the request. No subject line beyond pre-event discussion. Her assistant flagged it immediately. Do you want me to reschedule? Her assistant, Tom, asked. No, she said. Let's see what he wants. She knew what he wanted. He came to her office the following Tuesday, which was 11 days before the gala. He was accompanied by Pace, which meant this was not a conversation. It was a presentation. Pace handled the board's internal communications and had the particular quality of a man who believed himself to be pragmatic in a way that was indistinguishable from being unkind. Vivian, Rothwell said. He sat down in the chair across from her desk like a man taking his rightful seat. I'll be direct. Please, she said. There's been some concern. He paused in the way powerful men pause when they want the pause to do work. Among several board members and some of our larger investors, about the attention you're personal situation has been generating. My personal situation, she said. The coverage, Pace said, jumping in. Some of it has been not ideal for the company's image. Dana's monitoring it, she said. It's been manageable. For now, Rothwell said. The gala is in 11 days. There'll be media there. Significant investors. We have 3 major contracts currently in negotiation, and at least 2 of those counterparties are traditional in their view of leadership stability. He folded his hands on his knee. The concern is optics. You want me to come alone, she said. Rothwell didn't flinch. We think it would communicate a certain focus on the company. Vivian looked at him. She kept her face level, which she had become very good at, and inside she felt the specific, familiar quality of a particular kind of rage. Not the hot kind, but the cold kind, the kind that had been there long enough to become structural. I appreciate you raising it, she said. I'll think about it. Rothwell looked at her in the way he looked at things he thought he'd already settled. Vivian, I said I'll think about it. She smiled, professional, complete. Thank you for coming in. After they left, she sat at her desk for 4 minutes without doing anything. She looked at the city through the window. She thought about how many times she had done this, absorbed something that shouldn't have been said to her, processed it in private, moved on. She'd gotten so efficient at it that it sometimes scared her. She called Grayson. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was probably on a break or between things. Hey, the board wants me to come alone, she said. To the gala. A pause. Not long. Rothwell? And Pace. She was looking out the window. They're framing it as optics. What does that mean exactly? It means they think you make me look like I have poor judgment. The silence on the other end was the particular kind she'd learned to read. Not empty, but full of something being held. What did you tell them? He asked. That I'd think about it. And have you? She almost said yes. She almost said no. I'm thinking about it right now, on the phone with you, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Vivian, if going alone protects the company, don't do that, she said. I'm serious. If it's a real business risk, I know you're serious. Stop. Her voice was even, but had something underneath it. I'm not calling you so you can tell me to protect the company. I know how to protect the company. I've been doing it for 6 years. A beat. Okay, he said. I'm calling because I'm angry and I needed to tell someone who wasn't going to immediately start problem solving. Okay. A pause. I'm angry too, for what it's worth. I know. Not helpful right now, probably. A little helpful, actually. She heard him exhale. What are you going to do? She looked at the city. She thought about 11 years of doing what was necessary. 11 years of building runway and making the practical choice and absorbing what needed absorbing. I'm going to go to the gala, she said, and you're going to come with me, and I'm going to figure out the rest. Another pause. Shorter this time. Okay, he said. Tell me what time. The tuxedo situation was Marcus's fault. Grayson had gone to rent one from a place Marcus recommended, which had turned out to be closed on Wednesdays, which Marcus had somehow not known, which meant Grayson had spent 40 minutes driving to an alternative that cost significantly more than he'd budgeted and fit almost correctly except for the sleeves, which the tailor said she could take in if he came back Thursday. He came back Thursday. The sleeves were fixed. He tried it on in the mirror in the narrow dressing room and thought, this is not his world. This was a fact, not a complaint. He knew how to dress for the world he lived in, which was not the world of charity galas and investment negotiations in Rothwell and Pace, but he also thought, Vivian asked me to be there. And the people trying to keep me away are not people I'm going to give that power to. He paid for the tuxedo rental. He drove to pick up Maisie. He made dinner, pasta again because it was reliable, and helped Maisie with her family tree project, which had evolved into an elaborate poster board situation with photographs and hand-drawn arrows and a caption system that was entirely Maisie's own design. Can I put Vivian on here? Maisie asked, not looking up from the glue stick. He stopped. She's not. It's a family tree, Bug. I know what it is. Maisie pressed a photograph down carefully. But we're going to know her for a long time, right? He looked at the back of his daughter's head, the particular calm certainty of children who have decided something. Maybe, he said. Maisie nodded like that was good enough and moved on to the next photograph. The night of the gala was cold and clear, the city sharp-edged and lit. Vivian's driver picked him up. She'd arranged it, practically, without making it a thing, which he'd accepted with similar practicality. And he rode across the city in the back of a car that was quieter and smoother than any vehicle he'd been in recently, and arrived at a venue that was the kind of building that made you understand why buildings made some people feel powerful and other people feel small. He chose neither. He straightened his jacket in the lobby window and went inside. She was already there, in the way that hosts are already everywhere, moving between clusters of people with the professional ease he'd seen glimpses of and never the full version. She was wearing a deep blue dress, fitted, no concessions, and she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had built something real and knew it. She saw him across the room, and the particular thing her face did. Not a big thing, not a theatrical thing, just a small loosening of whatever she was holding, was something he was going to remember. She crossed to him. You made it. I made it. He looked at the room. Hundreds of people, circular tables, a stage at the far end, cameras near the entrance from 2 different outlets. This is a lot. You'll be fine, she said, and touched his arm briefly, the first entirely public gesture she'd made, and he felt her make the decision in it. You sure you want to do this? He said quietly, just for her. She looked at him. I'm sure, she said. And then, because she was being honest, I'm also scared. Yeah, he said. Me too. It's fine. She almost smiled. Come on, I'll introduce you to the ones worth meeting. The evening had its own architecture. He met people whose names he immediately lost and then found again through context, learned quickly who was important by how long Vivian held their eye contact, and navigated the particular social physics of a room where everyone was performing status simultaneously. It was not entirely unlike the warehouse, he decided. Different materials, same basic human machinery. He was standing near the bar with a water he'd barely touched when the conversation changed. He'd been talking to a man named Ellis, a mid-level executive type who'd been friendly enough, and then a woman he didn't know joined them. Tall, sharp, in a way that was deliberate, with the specific social aggression of someone testing a room. You're Vivian's, she said to Grayson, and let the sentence dangle. Her guest, he said. Right. The woman smiled without warmth. Interesting choice for the gala. She glanced around as if gauging who might be listening. Some of the board aren't exactly thrilled. I know, Grayson said. This seemed to catch her off guard. You know, she told me. The woman reassessed him in the way people sometimes reassessed him when they'd assumed one thing and he'd said something that didn't fit it. And you're still here. I'm still here, he said. She studied him for a moment, then she moved on, the way people at galas move on, to the next assessment. Ellis looked at Grayson with something that might have been respect. She has more enemies in this room than she should, he said, not unkindly. I noticed, Grayson said. They've been trying to corner her for 2 years. The personal angle, it's not really about you. You know that, right? It's leverage. He nodded. He'd figured out that much. She's better than all of them, Ellis said. I hope she knows that. Grayson looked across the room to where Vivian was standing with 2 men he'd identified as board members. She was listening, her posture composed, her face professional. The slight tension in her jaw was something you'd have to know her to see. She does, he said. On good days. It was during the dinner portion between the keynote and the auction that Rothwell made his move. Grayson felt it before he understood it. A shift in the room. Nothing loud, nothing sudden, just a change in the social weather the way pressure drops before a storm. He watched Pace approach Vivian's table and say something, and watched Vivian's face go still in the specific way it went still when she was absorbing something she hadn't been ready for. Then he watched Vivian excuse herself from the table and follow Pace toward a side corridor, and the man who'd been introduced to him as Gerald Hurst, one of the larger shareholders, Marcus had mentioned him, Grayson had catalogued. Catch his eye from across the room and look away quickly, which meant something. He sat with it for 8 minutes. He drank his water. He watched the room with the attention of someone who'd learned to read spaces. Then he excused himself and found the corridor. He didn't go in. He stood at the edge of it, where the noise of the ballroom fell to a low background hum, and he heard enough. Rothwell's voice, low and even, carrying the particular authority of someone who had already decided the outcome of the conversation he was having. The shareholders are watching this. Gerald has been very clear. There are 3 names being discussed for restructuring the executive committee, and your name is not secure on that list if this continues to be a distraction. And Vivian's voice, steady, which he knew cost her. You're calling my private life a distraction. I'm calling it a liability, Rothwell said. That's less personal and more accurate. What exactly are you asking me to do? A pause. End it. Or at the very minimum, make it invisible. Remove him from public spaces connected to the company. Tonight was inadvisable. I invited a person I care about to a charity event. Whoa! You invited controversy to a room full of people who have money in your company. Rothwell's voice didn't change temperature. I've supported you, Vivian. I've pushed back on the people who said you weren't ready. But I need you to understand that the board's patience has a limit, and right now you are standing at it. Grayson stood very still in the corridor. He thought about what Ellis had said. It's leverage. He thought about 3 years of building runway, about the specific math of sustainable and unsustainable, about the moments where the right thing and the pragmatic thing aligned and the moments where they didn't. He thought about Vivian's face in the ballroom when she'd said, I'm scared, and the way she'd touched his arm after, like a decision. He stepped back from the corridor entrance. He went back to the table. He sat down and picked up his water and set it down and picked it up again. 8 minutes later, Vivian returned to the table. She sat. Her face was composed, completely professionally composed, the way it was when she was paying the cost of composure. Under the table, her hand found his. He held it, didn't say anything, just held it. After the auction, she said quietly, I need to make a statement. I know, he said. I'm going to... She stopped, looked at him. I'm going to do something that might not be tactically smart. Okay? Grayson. I know, he said. I'm here. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it should have given the room around them. He could see her working through it, not deciding exactly, because he thought she'd decided somewhere back in that corridor, processing, locating something in herself she was going to need. I don't know how this is going to land, she said. Very few things do, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Her hand tightened on his once, and then she let go because the auction was beginning and she was its chairwoman and the room needed her to be. He watched her stand. He watched her walk to the stage, that particular walk that was confident without performance. And he thought about a man who loads cargo and a woman who runs a company and a world that had decided that was funny. That was something worth photographing. He'd let them photograph it. He would not let them define it. The auction began. The room's attention shifted. And somewhere at the back of the stage, he saw Rothwell watching Vivian with the expression of a man who believed he'd already won something. He hadn't. Grayson didn't know how he knew that. He just did. He sat up a little straighter, and he waited. The call came at 11:15 that night, while the auction was still running and Grayson was near the back of the room where the noise was manageable. It was Marcus, which was unusual for 11:15 on a gala night, which meant it wasn't a social call. He stepped further back and answered. There's something you need to know, Marcus said. No preamble, which meant it was already bad enough that preamble felt like wasted time. One of the guys from the warehouse, not Terrence, somebody else. Who? Doesn't matter who. He sold something to one of the trade blogs. A pause. Grayson. They're running something tomorrow morning. About you. Marcus sounded like he was choosing words. They talked to someone from the building, too. The framing is... it's not good. The angle is that you targeted her, deliberately. The room noise swelled and retreated around him. That I went after her money, he said. Yeah. He stood with it. The cold, specific clarity of it. how clean it was, how perfectly it served the people who needed a story that explained this away. Of course, not a real connection, not two people who'd eaten eggs and walked along a river and fallen asleep on opposite sides of a living room. Something calculated, something predictable, something that made sense to people who needed things to make sense. "When does it go up?" he asked. 6 a.m. He looked at the stage where Vivian was holding a framed photograph at arm's length for the auction and laughing at something someone in the front row had said, a real laugh, one he recognized. "Does she know?" he asked. "I don't know." "I'll tell her," he said. "Grayson, I'll tell her," he said again. He hung up. He stood in the back of the ballroom for a moment, in the room full of people who moved through the world without friction, and thought, here is the part where a reasonable person might calculate the cost. He thought, there it is again, the reasonable person problem. He straightened his jacket, the one that had cost too much and had required 2 trips to get the sleeves right. He went back to the table to wait for the auction to end, and when Vivian came off the stage and walked toward him across the room, he saw her register something in his face. The same attention he always paid her, turned inward now, something in it she'd learned to read. "What happened?" she said. He told her. The room moved around them. Rothwell was at a table across the floor watching. The cameras near the entrance were still rolling. The city was outside, cold and bright and entirely indifferent. Vivian listened. She didn't look away from him. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she looked across the room, not at Rothwell specifically, just at the room. All of it, the whole assembled weight of it. And something shifted in her face. Something that had been held for a very long time. "I have to get up there again," she said, "before the evening ends." "I know. Are you going to be okay out here?" He looked at her. "Vivian, go." She held his gaze for one more second. Then she turned and walked back toward the stage, and Grayson Hale stood in the back of that ballroom in his rented tuxedo with the corrected sleeves and watched the woman he loved prepare to do something she'd been building toward for longer than either of them had known the other existed. The room quieted as she reached the microphone. He put his hands in his pockets. He listened. The room went quiet. The way rooms go quiet when someone walks to a microphone with a particular kind of intention. Not the polite quiet of an audience settling. The other kind, uncertain, attentive, aware that something is shifting without knowing yet what direction it's going. Vivian stood at the podium and looked out at the ballroom. She'd stood at this podium before, 4 times, counting tonight. She knew its height, the way the lighting hit from the left, the specific acoustic quality of the room that made her voice carry farther than felt natural. She delivered keynotes from this spot, thank you speeches, the careful, calibrated language of a person who understood that every public word had a downstream consequence. Tonight she had not written anything down. She looked out at the room, at Rothwell near the center, his face arranged in the professional neutrality of someone waiting to assess damage, at Pace beside him with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking, at Gerald Hurst at the far table who had been the name attached to shareholder revolt when she turned that phrase over in her mind, at Dana near the back wall who had the expression of a crisis communications professional, watching a situation develop in real time and not quite knowing whether to intervene. She looked at Grayson, at the back, hands in his pockets, standing the way he always stood when he was waiting for something, fully still, fully present, nothing performed about it. She took a breath. "I want to say something tonight that isn't in the program," she said. Her voice was even. "I hope you'll bear with me." The room held. "I started this company when I was 24 years old," she said. "I had no capital, one investor who was taking a significant risk, and a business model that 3 separate advisors told me was too aggressive. I also had, and this part didn't make it into most of the profiles, a very specific relationship with walking into rooms and immediately understanding what people thought of me before I said a word. A slight shift in the audience, not movement. Something more subtle. Attention recalibrating. I learned early that there was a certain kind of leadership that was available to me and a certain kind that wasn't. And I built the company inside those constraints because that was what was available. I learned to put the numbers first because numbers are harder to argue with than impressions. I learned to dress a particular way and speak a particular way and manage a particular image, because image was currency and I needed the currency. She paused. What I didn't realize for a very long time was what it was costing me. Rothwell's face had not changed, but his posture had, something fractionally tighter, something that recognized the direction of this and was beginning to calculate. Several weeks ago, Vivian continued, I went on a date I didn't particularly want to go on. The man across from me was 32 years old, worked 3 jobs, was raising his daughter alone, and had no idea who I was, and no particular interest in my net worth. Something moved in her voice, not breaking, not close to it, but present, human. And the way he talked to me across that table, like I was just a person, like what I said mattered more than what I looked like saying it, was something I hadn't experienced in longer than I wanted to admit. She heard the room, the particular quality of its silence. Someone photographed us that night, she said, and the internet did what the internet does. And then the business press did what it does. And then people in this very room began having conversations about whether my judgment was sound, whether my leadership was stable, whether my choice of who to care about reflected on my fitness to run the company I built. She let that sit for a moment. I want to be very clear about something. Those conversations were not about the company. They were about whether I was allowed to be a full human being and still be taken seriously. And the answer, from certain people in this room, has been no. Rothwell set down his glass. It made no sound. I've been in this industry long enough to know what the move is, Vivian said. The move is to come up here and give you the safe speech, thank our sponsors, talk about the quarterly projections, smile the right way, and say nothing that can be used against me in the next board meeting. She looked at the room steadily. I'm tired of the safe speech. A long beat. Grayson Hale is not a liability, she said. He's a man who loads cargo for a living and reads to his daughter at night and showed up to a charity gala in a rented tuxedo because I asked him to, knowing full well what people in this room would say about it. He is also the first person in years who made me feel like myself. Not the version of myself I've learned to perform, but the actual version. The one that gets scared. The one that makes mistakes. The one that is... Her voice held. Still worth something, even without the building and the title and the corner office. She looked directly at Rothwell. I have run this company for 6 years, she said. I have delivered results that exceeded projections in 4 of those 6 years. I turned a hostile acquisition attempt into a strategic partnership. I built a culture that has a 91% retention rate in an industry that averages 63. I did that while absorbing a level of scrutiny that my male counterparts in equivalent positions have not been asked to absorb. And I did it while being told consistently that what I looked like mattered to the brand. Something cold and clear moved through her voice. My personal life is not a shareholder concern. And any board member who has been using it as leverage in private conversations to pressure me toward compliance should understand that I am aware of those conversations, and I consider them a serious breach of fiduciary responsibility. The silence that followed that sentence was a different quality than what had come before. Harder. More electric. Rothwell's jaw had tightened. Pace had gone very still. Gerald Hurst, across the room, had put down his wine and was looking at Rothwell rather than at the stage. I'm not resigning, Vivian said. I'm not distancing myself from anyone. What I'm doing is standing up here and asking this room, investors, partners, colleagues, press, to decide what you actually value. Because if what you value is results, integrity, and leadership that doesn't collapse under pressure, then I'm your CEO. If what you value is someone who looks and lives in a way that makes certain people comfortable. She let the sentence finish itself. She stepped back slightly from the podium. Thank you for attending the gala, she said. It's been a remarkable year for our charitable initiatives, and I mean that without any reservation. The work we've done in this community is real, and I'm proud of it. A pause. Enjoy the rest of your evening. She walked off the stage. The room came back to life the way rooms do after something that hasn't quite resolved, gradually, unevenly, in small clusters of 2 or 3 people turning to each other with the particular energy of people who have just witnessed something and need to process it out loud. Dana met her at the edge of the stage. Her expression was the complicated face of someone who had spent a career in crisis communications and was encountering a situation that didn't fit her usual categories. That was, "Don't," Vivian said. "Not yet." "Okay." Dana held her clipboard with both hands. "Okay, just, are you all right?" "I'm fine." She wasn't entirely, but she was close enough. "Where is he?" Dana tilted her head toward the back of the room. Grayson was where she'd left him, still standing, still steady. The room was moving around him, and he wasn't moving with it, which was, she'd come to understand, just how he was built. She crossed the room toward him. She was aware of people watching her as she moved. She was always aware of that, but it felt different now. Not the weight of assessment, but something else. Uncertain, unsettled, like a room that had just been rearranged and wasn't sure about its own furniture yet. She reached him. "That was something," he said. "Was it too much?" He looked at her carefully. "Was it what you meant?" "Every word." "Then it wasn't too much." He looked across the room, taking a reading. "How are you feeling?" "Like I just stepped off a very high ledge, and I'm still waiting to find out whether there's water or concrete below," she said. "Yeah." He paused. "For what it's worth, from where I was standing, tell me later," she said. "Right now I need to get through the next hour." He nodded. "I know. I'll stay out of the way." "You're not in the way." She said it quickly, instinctively. "You've never been in the way. That's not Vivienne." He said her name quietly, the way he did when he wanted her full attention. "I know, I meant I'll give you room to work the room. I'll be here." She looked at him for a moment, then she put her hand on his arm and left it there for exactly the length of time it took to communicate everything she didn't have words for right now, and then she turned and went back into the room. Todik. The first thing that happened was Ellis found her. He came across the floor with a glass of sparkling water held out like an offering, which she accepted because she needed it. "That took guts," he said. "Real ones. Not the performed kind." "I know the difference," she said. "I know you do." He stood beside her, looking out at the room. "Hearst is talking to Nakamura right now. I don't know which way that's going." Hearst was the shareholder whose name had been attached to the restructuring conversation. Nakamura was the board's largest independent investor and had been, in Vivian's experience, someone who went where the numbers pointed. She watched them talk across the room. "Rothwell's not happy," Ellis said. "I know." "Are you worried?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Some, but I was going to be worried either way. At least now I'm worried about something I actually did." Ellis looked at her sideways. "That's either very brave or very stubborn." "Probably both," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I'm going to put in a call tomorrow morning," he said, "to 2 or 3 people whose opinions carry weight with Hearst. I won't do it if you'd rather handle it yourself." "I'd rather not handle it alone," she said, which was an honest thing she wouldn't have said 6 months ago. He nodded. "Then I'll make the calls." The second thing that happened was harder. One of her senior employees, a woman named Reyes, who ran operations and had been with the company 4 years, who Vivian had mentored quietly, who had always been professional and somewhat guarded in the way of people who protect themselves carefully, found her near the end of the evening. "I just wanted to say," Reyes started, and then stopped in the way people stop when they haven't quite planned the middle of a sentence. "It's okay," Vivian said. "Take your time." Reyes looked at her directly. "When you said, the thing about walking into rooms and knowing what people think before you've said anything," she paused. "I know what that is. I've known what that is since I was 17 years old." She said it plainly, without drama, the way you say things you've already processed. "I've never heard someone say it out loud in a room like this." Vivian felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically. The specific, quiet shift of recognizing something you'd stopped expecting to find. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. Reyes nodded once, efficient. "Also, for the record, the Q3 logistics restructure I've been waiting on approval for is genuinely going to save the company about $800,000 annually, and I'd like to present it to the full board before Rothwell tables it again." She paused. I thought this was as good a time as any to mention it. Vivian looked at her for a moment, and then laughed. A real one, The unmanaged kind. Set the meeting, she said. I'll clear the calendar. Reyes allowed herself a small smile and went back into the room. It was close to midnight when the room began genuinely thinning. Grayson had found a chair near the wall an hour ago and was sitting with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who'd attended a corporate gala the same way he attended everything. Present, uncomplicated, unbothered by the distance between this and his usual Friday night. She sat down next to him. She was tired in a way that went below her bones. The good kind, if there was a good kind. The kind that comes from spending something rather than just holding it. Hurst came to find me, she said. He straightened. And? He's going to request an independent review of the board's communications over the past 3 months. She looked at her hands. Apparently some of the pressure from Rothwell and Pace went further than I knew. There were direct messages to 2 of the institutional investors suggesting I was unstable. A pause. He used the word unstable. Grayson's expression didn't change, but his jaw did the thing. He said that. In writing, apparently. Hurst found it embarrassing. It is embarrassing, Grayson said. For him. Yes. She leaned her head back against the wall. Ellis made some calls. 3 people who matter have already contacted Dana with statements of support. I don't know what the morning looks like yet, but tonight, she exhaled. Tonight is different than I thought it was going to be when Rothwell had me in that corridor. What did you think it was going to be? She was quiet for a moment. I thought I was going to have to choose between the company and you. That's what he wanted me to believe. Grayson looked at her. And now? Now I think that was never actually the choice. She turned her head to look at him. I think the choice was always whether I was going to keep building a life inside the shape other people decided was acceptable for me. And I've been building inside that shape for a long time. He was quiet. I'm tired of that shape, she said. Yeah, he said. I know. They sat there in the thinning ballroom for a moment, with the catering staff beginning their quiet work of clearing and the last clusters of guests making their slow way toward the exits, and the city outside doing what it always did, indifferent and constant. The blog article, she said. The one that's going up tomorrow. Yeah? Does it bother you, what they're saying? He thought about it. Not the quick answer. The actual answer. It bothers me that someone sold it, he said, because that's somebody deciding to take a shot at both of us for something they could probably use a few $100s for. That bothers me. He paused. The framing, that I'm after your money. A slight exhale. Only if you believe I'd do that. And I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what people believe who don't know me. What about the ones who do? What about them? Marcus forwarded it to you, she said. People you work with know. Terrence already said something. Yeah. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. I've been loading cargo with some of those guys for 3 years. The ones who matter know what kind of person I am. The ones who don't know. And that's not something I can fix. He dropped his gaze back to her. Vivian, people have been talking about you for 6 years. You built a company anyway. I think I can handle people talking about me. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his face she'd been looking at for 2 months now, something she'd cataloged in pieces. The steadiness, the absence of performance, the specific quality of a person who had decided what mattered and arranged their life accordingly. Seeing it whole, all at once, was different. I meant what I said up there, she said, about what you did to me, what you do. She said it plainly, without decoration. You made me feel like myself again. I don't know if you understand how long it had been since that was true. He held her gaze. I understand some of it, he said, not all of it. No, you couldn't. She said it without blame. Your life is, you've had to hold things together differently. The things that wore down your sense of yourself are different from mine, but the result is, she stopped, found the words. We're both people who learn to get very good at surviving, and I think we're both a little out of practice at anything else. He was quiet for a moment, then, I think you're being too hard on yourself. Possibly, I usually am. Maisie's been asking about you, he said. Not as a subject change, as a continuation of something. She looked at him. What does she ask? Whether you're going to come to one of her things. She has a presentation next week for the family tree project. The corner of his mouth went up slightly. She's been very deliberate about not pressuring me about it, which means she's absolutely pressuring me about it. Vivian felt something catch in her chest that she hadn't been prepared for. Not the company, not the board, not Rothwell or the article or the shareholder review. A small presentation by an 8-year-old she'd met once, briefly, on a Saturday afternoon who had looked at her with her father's eyes and asked her 2 questions and then decided, apparently, that she was acceptable. "I'd like to go," she said, carefully, meaning it. "Then come," he said. Simple as that. No conditions, no navigation, no management. She nodded. They sat there a little longer while the room emptied around them. At some point her shoes came off, because her feet were done, and she tucked them under her chair and sat in her stockinged feet in the ballroom of a building she'd filled 4 times with the people who constituted her professional world, and felt the specific, strange lightness of something loosening. The morning article went up at 6:17 a.m., which Tom clocked and forwarded to her before her alarm went off. She read it on her phone in the dark, the specific blue light of bad news. It was what Marcus had warned, the framing of Grayson as a calculated move, the implication of gold digging elevated to a narrative, 3 anonymous sources, one of whom she was fairly certain was Terrence from the warehouse, and one of whom she was fairly certain was someone closer to her own world. She put her phone down. She lay in the dark for a moment, then she picked it up and texted Grayson. "Article's up." His response came back in under a minute, which meant he was already awake, which meant he'd been expecting it. "I saw it." "You okay?" "Yes." "Are you?" "Yeah." "Don't read the comments." "I never read the comments." "Good. Keep that going." She set the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Downstairs, the city was already starting. She could hear the low hum of it, trucks on the avenue, the early morning metabolism of a place that never entirely stopped. The article was going to circulate. The comments were going to be what they were. Some people who'd seen the gala speech were already talking about it online in a way Dana had described as unexpectedly positive, still monitoring in a late-night message. Some people would take the article's framing and run with it. Some would take the speech's framing and run with it. The truth: 2 people who had found something real and were trying to protect it without losing themselves would exist somewhere in the middle of all of that, the way truth usually did, accessible mainly to the people who were already looking for it. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at her window in the early morning light and looked at the city and thought, "I am still here. The company is still here. The things I said last night are still true this morning." She thought, "There's a family tree presentation next week that I've been invited to." She thought, "There is a man who answered my text in under a minute because he was already awake and already thinking about me, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal." She drank her coffee. At 7:15, Dana called. "The response to the speech," she said without preamble. "It's moved." A pause that contained something complicated. "Vivian? It's moved significantly. There are 3 articles from business publications this morning that are," Dana seemed to be choosing the word, "supportive. 2 industry voices have reposted the event footage, and Hearst's office sent an official statement this morning confirming the independent review." Vivian held her mug with both hands. "And Rothwell?" "Rothwell has been quiet, which is unusual for Rothwell." "Yes," she said, "it is. There's something else." Dana's voice changed texture. "One of the anonymous sources in this morning's article, the one that felt closer to your orbit than the warehouse?" "Yes. Our legal team believes it was Patterson." A pause. "From investor relations." Vivian absorbed this. Patterson had been with the company 3 years, had always seemed neutral, had been in 2 of the closed-door meetings where the shareholder strategy had been discussed. She felt the specific cold of knowing the leak had been internal, close, deliberate. "Pull his access today," she said, quietly. "HR and legal, full protocol. I'll deal with the investor relations gap separately." "Already started," Dana said. "Thank you." She paused. "Dana, the speech last night, I know it wasn't what you'd have recommended." "No," Dana said, "it wasn't." A beat. It was better. After the call, Vivian stood in her kitchen for a moment in the specific silence of a morning that was still deciding what kind of day it was going to be. She thought about all the things that needed doing: the Patterson situation, the board review, the 3 contract negotiations that had been cited as reasons for caution, Reyes's logistics restructure presentation, the article's circulation, and whatever the next 12 hours brought with it. She thought about all of it, and it felt, for the first time in a long while, like work she was doing rather than weight she was carrying. She went to get dressed. She had a full day, and on Saturday she had a family tree presentation to attend. The independent review took 3 weeks. Vivian had expected it to take longer, had braced for the particular drawn-out quality of institutional processes that move slowly by design, where delay itself is a form of power. But Hearst had appointed an outside firm. No board involvement, no internal filtering. And the firm was efficient in the way that firms are efficient when they've been handed actual documentation rather than competing claims. What they found was not surprising to Vivian. It was, however, documented now, which was a different thing entirely. Rothwell and Pace had been running a parallel campaign for 11 months. Not against the company. They'd been careful about that, careful enough that nothing they'd done crossed into actionable fiduciary breach on the company's behalf. But against her specifically. Emails to institutional investors suggesting concerns about her leadership stability. Private conversations with 2 members of the media flagged in the review as potentially coordinating coverage. The message Hearst had seen, unstable, in writing, was one of 7 similar communications that the review surfaced across a 6-month window. They had been building a case, slowly, carefully, brick by brick. The gala had been the moment they'd decided to accelerate it, to use the noise around Grayson as the triggering event. What they hadn't calculated was that she would stop absorbing it and start naming it. Dana called her the morning the review summary came through. "Legal wants to discuss options," she said. "Tell them I'll be there at 2, Vivian said. At 2, the lawyers laid out what was available to her. She listened carefully, asked 3 questions, and made 2 decisions. She was not going to pursue personal litigation against Rothwell or Pace. That was a war of attrition that would consume years and attention she preferred to spend on the company. What she was going to do was request their resignations from the board, with the full review summary in hand as the foundation of that request, and present the alternative to them as a choice. Step down, or have the summary made public in its entirety. Her attorney said, "They may not step down." "They'll step down," she said. They did. Rothwell's came through on a Thursday afternoon, terse, 3 sentences. Pace's followed the next morning, slightly longer, with the specific tone of a man who believed he was being wronged, but understood the math. She read both in her office, alone, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, nothing that clean. Just a kind of quiet. The particular quiet of a weight you've been carrying so long you stop noticing it, and then you set it down, and you notice the absence. She called Grayson. "They resigned," she said. A pause. She heard him exhale. "How do you feel?" "Strange," she said honestly. "Tired. Like the day after something big, when you expected to feel different, and mostly just feel empty in a particular spot." "That's normal," he said. "I know it is. Doesn't make it less weird." She looked out the window. The city was doing its November thing, gray and sharp. "I wanted to tell you first." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. The way he said it, simple, meaning it fully, was the only response that would have been right. "I have a board restructuring meeting next week," she said. 2 new independent seats to fill. Reyes is presenting the logistics restructure tomorrow, and I think the number is actually closer to $1.2 million in annual savings, not $800,000. And Dana has 3 media requests from outlets that want to do follow-up pieces on the gala speech. A pause. "It's a full week." "It always is with you," he said. "Is that a complaint?" "Not even slightly." She smiled. The city was gray outside, and the day was full, and the weight was gone from that particular spot, and she was on the phone with a man who answered in under a minute and meant it. "Saturday," she said. "Maisie's presentation is at 1. "I know," he said. "She's been practicing." "She's been practicing?" She didn't tell you this? She texted me about it on Tuesday, but I thought she actually practiced? 4 times in the living room, he said. She made me sit in the chair and pretend to be the audience. She corrected my clapping. A pause. She said it wasn't enthusiastic enough. Vivian laughed, the real kind, the one she'd stopped managing. I'll bring enthusiastic clapping, she said. She'll appreciate that, he said. She'll pretend she doesn't. I know, Vivian said. I'm learning her. The family tree presentation was in Maisie's classroom on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of elementary school event that exists in the particular category of things adults show up for because the child in question is the whole reason. The classroom smelled like construction paper and dry erase markers, and the specific institutional cleanliness of places that are cleaned every evening and populated every morning by people who have not yet learned to be contained. Maisie's poster was on the far wall. Vivian spotted it the moment she walked in. Not because it was the most elaborate, though it was thorough, but because Maisie had used a color coding system she'd apparently invented herself, with a legend in the bottom corner explaining what each color signified. The child was running some kind of taxonomic project on her own family history, which was exactly the kind of organizational energy Vivian recognized. She recognized it because she'd had it at that age. The need to make order out of information, the specific pleasure of a system that made sense. Grayson was already there, standing near the window in his regular clothes, jeans, a dark flannel, none of the effort of the gala, talking to another parent with the easy manner of someone who'd been doing school events for years. He saw Vivian come in and his face did the thing she'd cataloged, the small loosening. He excused himself from the other parent and crossed to her. She saw you come in, he said quietly. She pretended she didn't. I know, Vivian said. I pretended not to notice that she noticed. He looked at her. You two are the same person. We are absolutely not. She stopped, thought about it. Maybe a little? Maisie's presentation lasted 11 minutes. She stood at the front of the classroom in the specific posture of a child who has practiced and knows it, and is trying not to let on that she knows it, and she talked through the poster with a pointer that was actually a ruler she'd decorated with stickers. She explained the color coding system. She talked about her grandparents, her aunt, the photograph of her parents at what she described as before, when things were different, with the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of a child who had processed her own family's complexity and arrived at something functional. She talked about Rudy's diner on Sunday mornings. She talked about Mrs. Okafor downstairs who watched her on weeknights, and made soup that was, in Maisie's assessment, better than anything. And in the bottom right corner of the poster, connected by a green line, Maisie had apparently designated green for people who are becoming part of things, was a small photograph. Vivian recognized it because she'd been in it. She'd taken a selfie with Maisie 3 weeks ago on a Saturday afternoon at the apartment. Maisie's idea, executed with the absolute unself-consciousness of a child who sees something she wants and acquires it. She hadn't known it was going on a poster. Under the photograph in Maisie's handwriting, Vivian. She's still being decided, but probably yes. Vivian looked at that caption for a long moment. She felt something in her chest that didn't have a clean name. Not sentiment, something more structural than that. Like a load-bearing thing that had been standing in uncertain ground and just found solid footing. The parents clapped. Grayson clapped with, she noted, entirely appropriate enthusiasm. She clapped too. Maisie looked at both of them from the front of the classroom with the expression of someone who is satisfied but professionally required to seem modest about it. Afterward, in the parking lot, while the other families were making their way to cars, Maisie appeared at Vivian's elbow. Did you see the poster? She asked. The studied casualness of a child pretending to not care about the answer. I saw it, Vivian said. The green means becoming. I know, you explained the legend very clearly. Maisie looked up at her. Do you mind that I put you on it? Vivian crouched down so they were at the same level, which she'd started doing because Maisie had the kind of face that deserved to be met directly. I don't mind, she said. I'm honored. Maisie considered this. It's not official or anything, she said. The probably yes part. I understand. I just think you're probably going to be around. I think so too, Vivian said. Maisie nodded once, satisfied, and then ran off toward her father in the manner of someone who had completed a task and was now free to do something else entirely. Grayson caught her, swung her sideways with the automatic ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. She shrieked in the way that meant she'd wanted him to do that. He set her down and looked across the parking lot at Vivian with an expression she was still learning to fully read. Complex, layered, something that went deeper than the surface of any given moment. She walked over. "She interrogated you," he said. "She conducted a very professional assessment," Vivian said. "I passed." Obviously. He held Maisie's hand. The three of them stood in the school parking lot in the November afternoon. "Rudy's?" he said. "Rudy's," she said. They went to Rudy's. Maisie got the pancakes and didn't finish them. Vivian stole one because she'd decided she was allowed to, and Maisie pretended to be outraged, and Grayson drank 2 cups of coffee and watched the two of them with an expression that he didn't try to manage. It was ordinary. It was completely, specifically ordinary, and Vivian thought, this is what I was afraid of wanting, this exact thing. But the months that followed were not easy because nothing that's real is easy, and Vivian had been around long enough to distrust anything that came without friction. The board restructuring took 6 weeks and required 3 separate mediations with institutional investors who'd been spooked by the Rothwell fallout and needed the kind of reassurance that could only come from sustained results. The 2 new board seats were filled with people she'd chosen carefully, an independent director with a background in operational finance, and a woman named Simone Akebe, who had built and sold 2 companies and had a reputation for saying exactly what she meant in board meetings, which was what Vivian needed most. Reyes's logistics restructure went through in December. The actual savings in the first quarter came in at $1.1 million, which was slightly under Reyes's revised estimate, but still prompted a long, candid conversation between them in Vivian's office that ended with Reyes being offered a VP title she'd been 2 years overdue for, and accepting it with the specific satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting long enough that receiving it felt earned rather than given. The article, the one that had gone up the morning after the gala, had its 15 minutes and then receded the way these things do when they don't find the traction they're looking for. The blog that ran it posted a follow-up 3 weeks later that was, in tone, somewhat different from the original. Dana sent it to Vivian with a one-word message: interesting. Vivian read it, felt nothing particularly strong about it, and went back to the contract she'd been reviewing. Grayson got his foreman's license in February, 2 months ahead of his own projected timeline, which he mentioned to her on a Tuesday evening with the same matter-of-fact accounting he used for everything. She knew what it meant: a year of studying in the margins, early mornings, late nights after Maisie was asleep. The slow accumulation of something that had looked very far away for a very long time. "You could have told me when you were studying for it," she said. "I didn't want to make it a thing until it was a thing," he said. "It was already a thing." "Now it's a different kind of thing," he said. "Now it's done." He left the warehouse job in March, kept the maintenance position, which now came with a foreman's salary and regular hours. The math of his life changed, not dramatically, not overnight, but in the specific, meaningful way that a few $100s a month changes things for someone who has been building runway for years. The parking structure near her building cost $8. He stopped doing the mental math about the parking structure. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it because it wasn't something to say anything about. She just noticed. Maisie came to the office once, on a school holiday in March, and spent 4 hours running what she characterized as a very important inspection of the 26th floor. She reorganized the pens on Vivian's desk by color, which Vivian found annoying and left in place because it was also somewhat delightful. She met Dana, who she assessed as very fast at typing and probably stressed, and Ellis, who came by that afternoon and spent 20 minutes talking to Maisie about the mechanics of how elevators worked with the complete seriousness of a man who understood that children deserve actual answers. Maisie left the office with 3 branded pens she'd selected deliberately and a serious expression that suggested she was still processing what she'd seen. In the car on the way home, she said to Grayson, "Vivian's office is very high up." 26th floor, he said. "That's a lot of floors." "It is." Maisie was quiet for a moment. "She worked really hard to get up that high." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "She did." Like how you work really hard. Yeah, he said. Like that. Maisie looked out the window at the city going by. Different kind of hard, though, she said, with the particular accuracy of a child who has been paying attention to things adults think are above her. Her kind has more people looking. He didn't say anything for a moment. Yeah, he said. It does. That seems tiring, Maisie said. I think it is, he said. Sometimes. Maisie nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and turned back to the window and spent the rest of the ride telling him about a book she was reading that had a dog in it who was smarter than all the humans, which was a plot line she found personally vindicating. There is something specific about watching two people navigate the distance between their lives that none of the fairy tale versions bother to show. The actual texture of it. The Tuesday evenings where one of them is exhausted in a way the other can't entirely reach. The Saturday mornings where the logistics of a child and a company in two separate apartments require more coordination than romance. The arguments, small, real, the kind that happen when two people who are both accustomed to controlling what they can start applying that to each other. They had those arguments. The first real one was in April over something that started as scheduling and became something larger. She'd moved to Saturday without telling him, rearranged something they'd planned, and his response had been quiet in the specific way that meant something was wrong that wasn't about the schedule. It had taken her 2 days of replaying the conversation to understand that what she'd done was treat their time like a variable she could optimize, which was how she treated everything in her professional life, and which he had not experienced as optimization, but as a message about relative value. She told him this when she understood it, which took longer than she was proud of. I'm not someone you can just move around the calendar, he said. Not angry, but direct in the way he was direct when something mattered. Neither is Maisie. I know, she said. I know that. I handled it wrong. Yeah. He looked at the table between them. You also didn't ask. You just told me. I'm used to... She stopped. That sentence had a bad ending regardless of which direction she took it. I'm used to making decisions fast and notifying people after. It's a habit from work that I'm not your staff, he said. I know you're not. They were quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. She'd gotten better at saying that without qualifying it immediately. It had taken practice. I'm going to do that again sometime probably, not intentionally, but I'm going to be in motion and I'm going to treat something like a variable that isn't a variable. She looked at him. When I do, tell me. Don't go quiet and wait for me to figure it out. He looked at her. You figured it out. Eventually, it took 2 days. Yeah, he said. Tell me quicker next time. Deal, she said. It wasn't resolved cleanly, because arguments between real people don't resolve cleanly. They resolve gradually, the tension bleeding out over the following days until you realize it's gone. But it resolved. And what came after it was a slightly different and more honest version of what they'd been building, which was the thing about arguments in real relationships. Not that they destroy something, but that they build something if the people having them care enough to stay in the room. They stayed in the room. Well, the community foundation was Grayson's idea, which meant it started as something very small that he mentioned almost as a side note and turned into something else entirely once Vivian got a hold of it. He'd said, in passing, that he'd been thinking about single parents in situations like his 3 years ago, the years before the foreman's license, before any of it, and how the gap between where they were and where they needed to get to wasn't impossible to bridge if someone built the bridge. She'd said, what would the bridge look like? He'd said, job training, mostly, real certifications, not just resume workshops, and emergency funds, not loans, grants for when the transmission goes. She'd said, Mom, tell me more. He'd said, well, it was just an idea. She'd said, tell me more anyway. 2 months later, the Hale Mercer Community Foundation had a structure, a board, seed funding from the Mercer Group's charitable initiatives budget, and a partnership with 2 vocational training organizations that Grayson had selected himself after spending 3 weeks researching which ones actually placed people rather than just certifying them. It was not a big organization. It was not trying to be. It was trying to do the specific thing Grayson had described, build the bridge for a specific population in a specific city and do it without making them feel like charity cases in the process. The intake process was his design. He'd insisted on that. He knew what it felt like to need something and be required to perform gratitude in order to receive it. And the Foundation's intake process was built to feel like a resource, not a transaction. The name had been Vivian's idea, which he'd resisted. "It should just be the Foundation," he said. "It should have a name people can remember," she said. "Your name on it, sure. Mine doesn't." "Your name," she said, "is the entire reason it exists." She looked at him steadily. "You built the concept from lived experience. This is what it looks like when someone who's actually been through something builds the solution. I'm not putting just my name on that." He'd argued about it for approximately 4 days, which was how long his arguments lasted when she was right. The Foundation launched in June with a small event. Not a gala, nothing that resembled a gala. An afternoon gathering at a community center 2 miles from Grayson's apartment with folding tables and catered food from a restaurant owned by a woman who'd come through a job training program 4 years ago. 37 people came. 11 of them enrolled in the first cohort. Grayson gave a short speech that he'd written himself, and that was, characteristically, direct and honest and slightly uncomfortable for him to deliver because he was not a person who did things in front of crowds naturally. He talked about loading cargo and licensing exams and the specific weight of knowing your kid was watching you figure it out. He talked about what it means to have runway and what it means not to. He did not talk about Vivian because it wasn't that kind of speech. But she was there, at the back of the room, and when he finished and looked up, he found her in the crowd the way you find something you're already oriented toward without quite realizing it. She was clapping, enthusiastically. Maisie, standing beside her, gave her a look that suggested this was exactly sufficient. The lake was 3 hours north of the city, and it had been Claudia's idea, which meant it was technically Marcus's fault. They'd rented a house in August, not a big house, not a grand gesture, a house with a small dock and a kitchen that required navigation, and a grill that worked only on its own terms. Marcus and Claudia came, and Maisie came, and Mrs. Okafor came because Maisie had insisted, and nobody was going to argue with Maisie about this. Ellis came on the second day unexpectedly, but not entirely, because Vivian had mentioned it to him, and he'd said something about always wanting to see that lake, and she'd said, "Then come," which she'd learned from Grayson. The days were the ordinary days of a group of people who like each other well enough to be in a house together. They cooked badly in the kitchen and ate it anyway. Marcus burned something on the grill the first night and then redeemed himself completely the second. Maisie claimed the best chair on the dock on the first morning and maintained possession of it through strategic occupation for the entire trip. Claudia and Vivian sat on the porch one evening and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with the company or the board or the previous year, which was the specific pleasure of old friendships. They can hold your entire history and let you ignore it when you want to. Mrs. Okafor, who had been watching Grayson's apartment for years in the quiet way of someone who chose to be useful without making it a declaration, sat in the lake house kitchen on the second afternoon teaching Maisie a card game that she claimed she'd invented and which Marcus recognized suspiciously as gin rummy with one modified rule. Grayson, on the second evening, sat on the end of the dock after dinner while the house was still loud with everyone else inside. He was looking at the lake, which was going dark at the edges and holding the last light in the middle, and he was doing the thing he did sometimes, just being somewhere without being on the way to something. Vivian came out and sat beside him. They didn't say anything for a while. The lake moved. Somewhere behind them in the house, Maisie's laugh came through the window, high and uninhibited, the sound of someone who was safe enough to be loud. "She's happy," Vivian said. "She's running a card game scam," Grayson said. "But yeah." Vivian smiled. She was looking at the water. The last light was going pink and gold across the surface, the kind of thing that was technically beautiful, but that she'd stopped trying to translate into words, because some things land better when you just let them. "I've been thinking about something," Grayson said. His voice had a different quality than usual. Not nervous exactly, deliberate. The way it got when he'd been sitting with something long enough that it had found its shape. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the lake. He had his hands on his knees. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been working something out for a long time and had arrived at the point where not saying it would take more effort than saying it. I know neither of us is particularly good at doing this in the expected way, he said. And I know the last year has been a lot, and not all of it easy, and I know there are people who think they understand what this is, and they don't. He paused. I know all of that. She waited. I also know, he said, that I want to stop waking up in an apartment that doesn't have you in it. And I want Maisie to stop having two addresses for the person she's been putting on her poster in green. He turned to look at her then. And I know that I am not... He stopped. I'm not someone who has a lot. I'm someone who is building what he has. And I don't know what that looks like next to what you've built. And I've made peace with the fact that I don't know. But what I have, what I can give, is real. And it's entirely yours if you want it. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. He set something on the dock between them. It was not an elaborate ring. It was a simple band with a small inset stone, and she would find out later that he'd bought it 3 months ago and carried it in his jacket pocket every day since, through the foundation launch and the board restructuring and the Tuesday evenings and the Saturday mornings, waiting for the right moment in the entirely characteristic way of a man who was patient about the things that mattered. She looked at it. She looked at him. Grayson, she said. You don't have to decide right now, he said. I just needed to say it. She picked up the ring. She held it in her palm in the lake light, this man beside her who had ironed his shirt for a dinner he hadn't wanted to go to, who had held her hand under a gala table while she absorbed what Rothwell had said, who had stayed in the room, who was still in the room, who would, she understood completely, always stay in the room. She thought about the year, about all of it. The restaurant and the photographs and the speech and the board and the article and the arguments and the ordinary Tuesdays and the pancakes Maisie never finished and the color-coded poster and the probably yes in the bottom right corner. She thought, the world has had a lot of opinions about this, about what it looks like, about what it means, about whether a woman who looks like her and a man who does what he does and a child who runs card game scams in lake houses are a thing that makes sense. And she thought, the world can continue to have opinions. That has never been something she could stop. What she could do, what she had been doing, slowly, imperfectly, with more wrong turns than she'd planned for, was stop building her life around the shape of those opinions. Stop making herself smaller or larger or different to fit what other people needed her to be. Just be the actual version, the one that gets scared, the one that makes mistakes, the one that is still worth something. The one that fell in love with a man on a dock in the fading light of an August evening, with a ring in her hand that cost less than the earrings she was wearing and meant more than anything she owned. Yes, she said. He looked at her, just looked at her. Yes, she said again, more certainly, and she slid the ring on herself because she wasn't going to make him try to figure out which hand, and she already knew. And she held out her hand to look at it sitting there, and it sat there looking exactly like what it was. He exhaled. She hadn't realized how long he'd been holding that until it came out. She laughed. He laughed, a little, the rare, full kind. Behind them, the house was loud with everyone who didn't know yet. The lake was dark now at the edges, the last light gone, the water, and the sky, just sky. We should probably go tell the house, she said. In a minute, he said. They sat there one more minute. Here's what nobody tells you about the story that gets mocked, photographed, and reduced to a caption. It keeps going. After the cameras and the comment sections and the board meetings and the articles, it keeps going. Into the ordinary mornings and the mismanaged Saturdays and the arguments that don't resolve cleanly and the moments of sudden clarity that come without warning in kitchens and on docks and in elementary school parking lots. The world does not stop having opinions. That is simply the condition of being visible, and some people are more visible than others. And the cost of visibility is not something that goes away when the specific crisis does. What changes is not the world. What changes is how much of yourself you're willing to give it. Vivian Mercer spent 6 years building a company inside a shape that other people defined. She was very good at it. She delivered results and absorbed what needed absorbing and became someone who could walk into any room and know within seconds what it thought of her. She thought, for a long time, that this was what strength looked like. She knows better now. Not because someone taught her a lesson. Life is not that tidy, and she is constitutionally resistant to being taught lessons she hasn't arrived at herself. But because she spent a year watching a man who loaded cargo maintain his sense of himself under the specific, relentless pressure of a world that had decided what he was before he said a word. Who showed up anyway? Who stayed in the room? Who built runway through 2 a.m. study sessions and 3-job weeks, and a daughter who caught him in every lie and loved him through all of them? She learned from watching that. Not because he's perfect. He is not. They have established this repeatedly in the way of two people who have decided to be honest even when it costs them. But because his version of strong was different from what she'd been taught to recognize as strength, and recognizing it changed how she saw her own. Grayson Hale spent 3 years building a life that was entirely functional and entirely his, and entirely missing something he wouldn't have said he was missing because he was too busy keeping the thing running to look at the gaps. He had learned, through the particular school of difficulty, that love was another form of risk management, something you approach carefully, because the downside of getting it wrong when a child was watching was not something he was willing to calculate. So he'd stopped calculating it. He'd just focused on the runway and let everything else wait. He knows now that some things don't wait. Some things find you on a Tuesday evening when a friend says she pays attention, and the particular quality of that sentence opens a door you didn't know was there. And Maisie, who is 9 now and has moved on from the family tree project to an even more elaborate endeavor involving a hand-drawn map of the city with annotations about places of interest. Maisie, who corrected his clapping and interrogated Vivian in the parking lot and put her in green on the poster with the honest hedge of probably yes. Maisie knows things about people that most adults talk themselves out of knowing. She knew from the first Saturday morning at Rudy's, before anyone had used the word love or made any declarations, that this was a person her father looked at differently, that this was a person who looked at him back. She is a child who has processed her own complicated history with the practical grace of someone who had no choice but to process it, and has arrived at the conclusion that family is not a fixed thing, that it grows in directions you don't plan for. That green on a poster is not a guarantee, but it's a direction, and directions are enough to start with. The probably yes turned into yes. The ring sat on Vivian's hand through the rest of that August evening and through the noise of the house when they went inside, and Claudia made a sound that was entirely too loud, and Marcus shook Grayson's hand with both of his, and Mrs. Okafor said simply, "Good," which was the right word. Good. It is the right word for most of the things worth having. Not perfect, not flawless, not the version that exists in the framing of other people's cameras. Just good. Real and imperfect and ongoing and good. The lake was there the next morning, the same as it always was. Maisie claimed her chair on the dock. Marcus burned something again. The summer kept going. And the world that had once made jokes about an unlikely pair in a restaurant, the world that had uploaded photos and written captions and decided what the story meant before it had finished being written, that world kept moving too, the way it does, toward the next thing and the next. It had no particular investment in being wrong or being right. It just moved. They moved with it. Side by side, imperfectly, building what came next. That, in the end, is the only answer worth giving to a world that decides things about you before you've said a word. Keep going. Not as defiance, not as performance, just keep going. Keep building, keep choosing the person who stays in the room. Everything else, eventually, becomes the background. The lake, the dock, the ring catching the morning light, Maisie's laugh through the window. Good.